Today we have a special treat. We get to hear from the 2012 Excellence in Teaching Award recipient, Dr. Michelle Vieyra. Michelle, I'll give you a little bit of background on her. And first, let me tell you a little bit about that award for our new faculty. That's the Highlight Award for Excellent Teaching in the previous year. It's a student-nominated award. So the nominees are then chosen after they go through an extensive review process. But the most important thing is that the students do the nominating. And that's something that says a lot for all those that are nominated. In this case, Michelle had the opportunity of being selected as the recipient, and so she is an outstanding teacher, and we're happy to have her lead us in discussion on how we all can also maybe learn some tips and things from her to help us in the classroom. Michelle, she actually received her Bachelor's of Science degree in Biology and Psychology from Black Hills State University in Spearfish, South Dakota, right? Then she received her PhD in Biology from the University of South Carolina in Columbia in 2006, and then came to us in the fall of 2007. And then she's an assistant professor in the Department of Biology and Geology. Research interest. I always love sort of saying all the different things that we do. In her case, she's focusing on the molecular and behavioral studies of olfaction in reptiles, birds, and insects. She looks at the effects of undergraduate research experiences on STEM retention and skill development. And then the last one's also very interesting, plagiarism and student scientific writing. So just a variety of wonderful topics there. But again, help me in welcoming Michelle.
So when I was asked to give this talk, I of course at first was like, what in the world am I going to talk about? Because it's one thing to sit down and write a teaching philosophy, but it's another thing to try to tell other people how they can improve their teaching. And even though I am honored to have received this award and that my students think I'm a great teacher, I still don't feel worthy to tell other people how to teach, okay? But I tried my best, and so what I'm going to do is actually kind of start with the general principles of my teaching philosophy and then expand on that. And I want this talk to be very general, so anyone in any discipline can try to pick up some of these tips. But I also want some of the people that have been around a while to participate in this, okay? And so there's going to be some opportunities during the talk where I want some of the folks that are here today. By the way, there are at least 2 people here in this room other than me that's gotten this award. And probably others as well that have been here longer than I can remember. I just know of 2 that since I've been here. So there's definitely a lot of expertise in this room that I don't know everything. Okay, so these are the basic principles behind my teaching philosophy. And the first thing I think is very important is to teach students how to learn. Not just teach them the concepts of your class, the facts of history or the facts of biology, but to try to teach them how to be learners. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more, so I've got to restrain myself from talking too much about that right now. The other thing is to be very enthusiastic. I know it's hard sometimes. You come into class and you're just as tired as they are, but you need to keep your enthusiasm level up. The students are very perceptive about whether or not you think something is a little bit boring. So if it's important enough to talk about it, then you better be enthusiastic about it. And then at the same time, try to be very relaxed. Allow them to ask you questions, be very approachable, that sort of thing. And I'll talk about that more as well in a second. It's very important to be fair. I think that it is really easy to be really hard, especially when you're a new teacher. You're going to have all these really well-established rules, and you need rules, and I'll talk about rules in a little bit. But you can't expect your students to be any more accountable than you yourself can. Like attendance policies, I know I'm sorry if some of you actually do this, but the whole locking the door at 9 o'clock, and if they come at 9:02, too bad. I'm sorry, but I can't hold myself accountable for 100% of the time always being there at 9 a.m. And if I can't trust myself to do that, then I'm really, it's not really fair to expect the students to do that. You need to take an interest in your students as people. not as like a conglomerate of 48 people. You got to learn their names, you got to learn what they're about, why are they in college, what their teaching style or what their learning styles are, sort of what their motivations are, and that will help you kind of make them want to learn. And then finally, even though I want to be enthusiastic and fair and relaxed, I still have very high standards. Okay, you got to push for excellence. These students are capable of a lot more than you might expect. When you first give the very first exam, you might go, oh, geez, I really got to figure out how to make these exams easier. But you don't. You really don't. You can push for excellence, and you really should make your students work. So going back to the teaching students how to learn, I'll just give you a few tips that of things I've used. I'm really big on study guides. I think that, especially if you're teaching freshman classes, these students need some direction in how to study. I know a lot of people have different philosophies about this. They might say, well, they got the book, and they got my notes, and they should be able to figure it out. But I really don't think they know how to figure it out first. Then as I'm lecturing, I don't give them study guides on everything. But as I'm lecturing, a lot of times they'll say, okay, so how can we study this? How are different ways that you can look at this, different angles that you can take? My study guides, I use questions, and I just gave a couple little examples here, like what do all connective tissues have in common, okay? And then what are characteristics that basically set them apart? So I've got written out questions. Some people are really good at that type of a study guide. But other people are not so good at that, so I also like to make charts. I think charts are really good for those visual learners and the learners that need to be doing something to learn. It helps them to see connections between things. And so this is just an example. This chart is basically asking them to do the same thing that's in these two questions, but in a completely different way. This gets them to look at things from different angles, to see that I could ask questions in different ways. And then as I'm lecturing throughout the semester, there are opportunities for me to say, we could make a chart of this. And then I might, kind of say, okay, what could we do to make a chart? And I help them to see how they can start creating their own study methods. Because they're not going to get charts in everyone's class. So if I teach them how to do this, then hopefully when they get to another class without study guides, they can figure out how to do it on their own. And then of course, mnemonic devices, I use that a lot. And I've even had students try to come up with like really funny ones, and maybe I'll give an extra point to the one that makes me laugh the hardest or something like that, Something to make them come up with these mnemonic devices. All right, when I'm lecturing, I ask a lot of questions of the students. A lot of things like, do you remember what I said at the beginning of the semester? How does that relate? I'll ask them to guess, especially later in the semester when they should have basic concepts already. And I want to apply those basic concepts to new things. Instead of me just telling them, a lot of times I'll ask them. So what do you think, like for an anatomy class, I say, what do you think, what tissue do you think you'll find in this organ, given this function? And a lot of them can come up with it. So it's much better for me to have them come up with it than for me to just tell them. I've also started doing group discussion questions. This is something that I started doing after we've had the CI institutes. Luckily, I have labs. Labs give you a lot of freedom, a lot of time to do these sort of things. Those of you that just have lecture classes, it's a little bit harder to find time for these things. But I typically will give the group a really hard discussion question. Something that's going to make them really think hard. Something without one answer. And what I've found by doing this is that these students a lot of times are very confused. I can tell by how they're answering these questions, I can tell by listening to their discussions, that there are certain things that they just don't get. I would never know that if I didn't have them do this, okay? Of course, the kids in the groups that do know it better, they end up teaching the kids that don't know it. It's a really good way to get them to learn the stuff. It fosters study groups. I see that these kids start studying after class, they start setting up their own study groups. It's a really good way to get them to study more. I think it's really important important to teach the students more than just your subject. And most of you already do this, I'm sure, and this really fulfills the USC-Aiken mission. No matter what class you're teaching, I think even in math, which it's hard for me to think, how can you have them learn oral communication? But in every class, I think that there is a way that you can incorporate teaching them better oral communication, even if it's just having them stand up and explain how to solve something. Written communication, you don't have to necessarily assign them a full paper, but just, maybe have them just do a short essay. Critical thinking, I think like the group questions that I use get at that, and just different questions that you ask them. And then searching for and evaluating information. So to do that, again, you don't necessarily have to assign a full paper. You could just have them do an assignment where they have to find a primary research article on a given topic. And just the fact of finding it is something that they might not have ever done. I think this is kind of, well, it's related. It's really important to give as fast feedback as you possibly can. Now, I know we're all incredibly busy. We all have a lot on our plates. But if you're going to assign things, every 2 weeks, you got to give them back what they had in week 1 before they have to do what's due in week 3. They need feedback. They need to know how they're doing. They need to know how they can improve. And so they really need fast feedback. When you're giving feedback, I found that it's really important to point out strengths as well as weaknesses. It's really easy to take a paper and just put red marks by all the spelling errors and grammar errors and say this is disorganized, this is awkward. You got to give them some strengths, because otherwise when they see that, they go, well, just everything's wrong, and they just throw it and they feel defeated. But if you say, this is a really good topic, your research is really good, or I like this example that you gave, and then you say, but if you organized it a little bit differently, then the impact would be better. You've got to turn it into something sort of positive. They need to feel as if you're trying to help them, not criticize them. And then they're going to be much more receptive to your critiques. And then finally, when I have time, I found that peer review is a really good tool. And this is for any sort of project that they have. If you have them bring the project in, usually in a draft form, and then have a group, pass it around and make comments. This does 2 things. First of all, it allows the better students to sort of help out the weaker students. And then it also allows the weaker students to read examples from the better students. So the weaker students can go, oh, this is more what they're looking for. This is more a better way to answer these questions. And as far as the feedback that they give each other, it's, don't expect too much. They will typically just comment on spelling and grammar and maybe give some what is this word, or I can't read your handwriting. But that's kind of not the point. You're not using this because you want your students to grade each other, because you expect their grades to actually be meaningful, the ones that they're giving each other. It's more just a way for them to share the experience. It makes them think about the assignment more too, beyond just the 10 minutes they might have put into doing it. Now there are a lot of tools available to you, and so this is really aimed at the new faculty. Blackboard is something that I use quite a lot. If you don't know how to use Blackboard, I'm more than willing to help people set up Blackboard. There's also the CTE puts on Blackboard workshops every once in a while. It'd be a good idea to go to one of those. Did one just pass, or is one coming up?
Next Friday.
There we go, next Friday. If you don't know how to use Blackboard, you should go to that. Things you can do in Blackboard. You can post anything you want your students to have. Syllabus, study guides, PowerPoint presentations, sample quizzes or sample papers that you want them to look at. You can post their grades to Blackboard. So if you have a class that only meets once a week, and you've got everything graded 3 days after they took a test. They really love to have those grades right away. And it'll keep like a total for you. So it'll do your bookkeeping for you. There are a lot of features in Blackboard I don't even use, but you can do discussion boards, that sort of thing. Somebody in here might have done that before, and so I'll give you the opportunity in a second to talk about it. When I look at my student evaluations at the end of the year, and I just did a summary of this because I'm putting together my tenure file, the number one thing that students say to answer what's the most effective thing about this class, the number one thing that they put is that I provide the lecture presentations on Blackboard. I provide my PowerPoints on Blackboard. They print them out and they take notes on them. It's really good to keep the flow of the discussion going in class. So I don't have 500 people going, what'd you say? Can you repeat that? What was that? And they also like that it's almost like a security blanket that they've got these things and they don't have to like write down every word that I say. And the balance there is you don't want your PowerPoints to have everything on them because then they won't come to class. So my PowerPoints are more like just the terms and pictures. I don't put sentences usually. Like this is probably more writing than would be on one of my PowerPoint slides. Okay, SafeAssign is a plagiarism detection tool available through Blackboard. We also have Turnitin, which is another plagiarism detection tool. To me, SafeAssign is just easier because it's in Blackboard. The students are used to using Blackboard. It takes you literally 10 seconds to set it up. Turnitin takes a little bit more work on your end. And they have to use a whole new system that they're not used to. But either one works. This compares their writing submission to everything on the internet, and that includes journals, even things that need subscriptions. SafeAssign will check it against those. One thing it doesn't have, is like textbooks, but even some of that's in there now because the whole Google Books, there's a lot of books that it's checking against. It'll also compare their paper to every other paper ever submitted in the USC system. So if their roommate took the class the year before and they turn in the same paper, it's going to flag it. So you will catch them. I never catch that on this campus. I taught on the Columbia campus, and oh boy. Every semester, it would be like 10 people turning in their roommate's paper from the semester before. So it happens a lot up there. Something else you might not be aware of are course packs. Basically, if you put together a packet that you want the students to purchase at the bookstore, you can do so. It only costs $5 or $6 for them. I do this, I'll bundle my study guides, and if I'm assigning big writing assignments, I'll have like a thing on what's primary literature versus secondary literature versus popular literature, what's plagiarism, how to cite sources, citation guides, all that stuff. You can bind that all up, and then they purchase it, and then you don't have to make copies, because I don't know about your departments, but one of the things that most of the departments are having us do is make less copies because of budget cuts. So this is a good way to give them lots of stuff without having to print things out. So the next thing is to be enthusiastic. And like I said, this is difficult some days, especially when you have to teach an 8 a.m. class. Some of you have to. But being enthusiastic about the subject matter, I think, really makes the students want to learn it. If they see that you love this stuff, then it makes them at least a little bit more interested in it. I mean, they're not going to dedicate their life to it probably, like you have, but they'll be a little bit more excited about the material. I use humor a lot, and I mean, see, a lot of my teaching style is just my personality, so it's kind of hard for me to give you tips on that. I'm just a goofy, silly person, and I like puns, and I tell really lame jokes, and I'll throw in like a cartoon every once in a while in the PowerPoint, or I'll sing a stupid song or something. And the kids will look at you like you're really crazy. But they like it. It keeps them engaged. It also lets them see that you're kind of human. If you're kind of silly and goofy, that you're human and you're not just this dictator up there that's dictating what they need to learn. So I found that humor is really important. I try to use visual examples as much as possible. You know, this is the generation of students who have gotten everything digitally, either TV, computers, video games. They are very visual people. And especially if you're using a concept or talking about a concept that is difficult, and I get a lot of those in biology, so it's easy for me to talk about those in biology. But if you're talking about steps in a process, you go on the web, somebody's probably made a movie cartoon of it, okay? You find these things and you show them. I also teach animal behavior, and I just think it's ridiculous to do a whole semester of animal behavior where they're never actually watching an animal do things. So I use a lot of movie clips. So I talk about this is what animals do, and here you go. Look at this animal doing it. Okay, and then they're like, oh wow, she's really serious. Those animals really do that. I thought she was just making stuff up. I don't know. I seriously think they don't engage, that they're just memorizing facts. And it's not until I actually see it that they go, oh, okay. I get it, I believe you. It's not that they don't believe you, but I just think that they're not really processing the information. And then I try to apply the material to the real world as much as possible, especially to their world. I like to know what their majors are. I like to know what jobs they're looking to get into, because then I can tell them why the material is important for them personally to know. How are they going to use this when they become nurses, when they become whatever they're going to become? And I think all of you can use that no matter what class you're teaching. I thought our chancellor, Dr. Jordan, did an excellent job of telling these kids why you've got to take all these classes. Why, even if you want to be a computer scientist, that you need to know how to write, that you need to know about history, that you need to know communication skills. I think that you could apply these things when you're talking about them. And then they kind of go, oh, okay, I guess I do need to know this. Especially if you say this is going to help you make more money. This will help you get promotions. It's easy when I teach nursing students, because I just have to say, this is what keeps you from killing people. And, oh, okay. Okay. Hopefully you guys can already tell I'm a pretty relaxed person. I try to be very approachable. I try to get students to ask me lots of questions. I think that is almost what made me a shoo-in for getting this award, because I had this one student in my class that asked me the craziest questions. And she asked me crazy questions when they were actually in there reviewing me. And I'm like, thank you for asking a crazy question. Because it really shows that these kids, it amazes me sometimes the personal stuff that they'll ask me in front of everyone else. Like, are you kidding? You want to talk about that now? Okay. But, it's really important for them to feel that they can come to you. You're going to have no clue that they don't understand something other than them failing their tests, but by then it's too late, okay? You want them to feel like they can come to you and ask you anything, really. And you want them to be able to stop you in the middle of your lecture and ask you a question, because a lot of them are just so scared to do that. Then the way that you approach questions, I found this hard in the past, because sometimes students will ask you questions that quite honestly is just the stupidest thing you've ever heard. Okay, it's going to happen. And you're thinking in your head, are you kidding me? Have you not been here the last 3 weeks? But you can't show it, okay? You gotta turn that into a learning opportunity. You gotta say, oh, well, why do you ask that? Or why did you see it from that way? And you try to get their perspective. A lot of times they end up answering their own question in the process of them thinking about it. Okay? But especially, this happens a lot in anatomy. There are so many misconceptions and so many crazy ideas out there. And that's probably true of a lot of disciplines. So sometimes these questions are really getting at these really odd misconceptions or old wives' tales. And so it's my opportunity to say, so why do people believe this? Why is it that you thought of this? Who told you this? And then we can...
We call those old representatives' tales.
Old representatives' tales. Okay. But it's really good to get the students to try to think about why they have these misunderstandings and misconceptions. Now, there's a real delicate balance here. You can't be too relaxed. If you're too relaxed, you know they're going to run all over you. Okay? So this really runs into my next topic, which is the being fair while enforcing the rules. All right, so what about these rules? I should have brought a copy of my syllabus because you got to see my syllabus for CI. How many times did I put in bold, if you don't do this, you will fail?
Sometimes it was even colored.
Okay, you need to have very, very clear rules and expectations from the very beginning. I know as first-year students or first-year faculty, sometimes you might not even know what your rules and expectations are, especially expectations. You aren't really sure what these kids are capable of doing yet. But you need to, as soon as possible, figure that out. Figure out what are my rules, what do I want these students to be able to do, what do I not want them to be doing in class. You put it on the syllabus and you need to be really clear about it. Freshmen coming into college, you wouldn't believe how many of them don't think that they can get Fs. They're coming out of high schools where you basically can't give a student an F. Okay? I've had students that are absolutely shocked when they get a 30% of every test and I give them an F. How can I get an F? You failed every single test. How could you have not gotten an F? They don't get it. So you got to be clear. You know, you need to earn this many points to get this grade, this many points to get this grade. If you do this, you'll get a 0. If you don't do that, you'll get a 0. You got to be really clear. I know this sounds really mean at first, but believe me, the students appreciate it. They really appreciate that you have very clear rules and expectations. They really want to know. Now, having it in writing is really the best way to protect yourself, because if a student decides, students do sometimes decide that they're going to make a case that you weren't fair and they contest their grade, they can do that. And if you've got something in writing that was given to the student that says, well, it's spelled out that they can't do this, they have to do this, then basically that's your protection. But you also need to spend a little bit of time in class discussing it with them, because most of them will take it and they'll throw it in their backpack and then it's lost into the black hole. Okay? So take some time. If you're going to have some sort of an elaborate writing assignment in your class, you need to basically spend some time in the class discussing it with them. Don't expect them to know how to write, no matter what discipline you're in. Even if you're teaching a 500 level class, don't expect that they know, how to produce a good paper. You need to have exact penalties and consequences spelled out. Don't just make it up on the fly. They are going to hate you for that. This thing here, don't assume that students know anything about plagiarism. You heard that that's one of my research areas. One of the things I look at is plagiarism in graduate school. A quarter of them are still doing it in graduate school. So, freshmen in college are definitely not going to get it. If plagiarism is something that you care about, then you need to spend time in your class talking to them about it. Don't expect that they don't know that they can't copy people's homework. I mean, they've gone through high school doing this, so to them, they don't make this connection that you can't do this. So spell it out. I say that on papers. I do a lot of group projects, and then each person has to write their own paper. And if you don't tell them that it's an individual effort, you'll get people that write a group paper. You got to tell them that this is an individual assignment. Of course, you need to enforce rules and expectations equally. If you're going to make exceptions for one person, then you better be prepared to make exceptions for everybody that has the same exact circumstance. And believe me, they'll talk, so be careful. If one person comes and tells you that they didn't get this paper done because they had a service activity with their fraternity, and you decide that you're going to be really nice because you want to support service activities, then probably on the next assignment you're going to get 7 people that come and tell you that they didn't get it done because they had a service activity with their fraternity. And if you then tell them, well, I'm not going to accept that, you're going to get in trouble. They're going to not be very happy about that. So, you know, you got to enforce rules equally. And of course, I shouldn't have to say this, but I've observed this. It's not a good idea to have pets in your class, people that you give extra attention to. Students are incredibly perceptive of these things. You wouldn't believe how perceptive they are of this, so you just try really hard. It's hard, you know, the really smart ones that talk a lot in class, it's hard not to talk to them and buddy up with them, but you got to try not to. Now on the flip side, you know, I have all these rules, but you still got to be sympathetic and you got to be reasonable. Okay. Again, when I get my course evaluations, a lot of things I see a lot of times is she's very understanding. Okay. You got to at least appear to be understanding. Even if you decide that you are going to enforce all your rules, absolutely no exceptions, then you got to explain to them. You got to say, I'm sorry, but you know I have to stick to these rules. You explain to them why you have to stick to the rules. You don't just come across as, nope, I don't care. You got to be reasonable and sympathetic. And I've already said this, don't expect more from them than you can expect from yourself. Draconian policies do not go over well. You know, I've actually never been late to a class, but I'm really paranoid about it. So I don't really, you know, have late policies other than if you come in late, you have to be quiet. And if I give an exam, of course, it's at the very beginning of class. And so if you come in so late that you miss the quiz or whatever, then you've missed the quiz. You can't take it over. But I know I'm not perfect, so I don't expect my students to be perfect. Okay, the other thing that's part of being fair, and this is something else that's really challenging for a first-year teacher, is trying to come up with a fair amount of material for your class. If you look at a textbook, first of all, there's absolutely no way that you can cover the entire textbook in a semester. You probably all know that. History book, definitely not biology books that are like this. Okay? You're the expert in the field. You should be able to pare that information down to what you think is important, considering, you know, the classes that they're going to move into, whatever is expected of their discipline. You got to pare down that amount of information. This is just me personally. I know there's a lot of people that, you know, there's a textbook this big, and when they make exams, they actually do expect the student to know everything in the textbook, even if they didn't have time to talk about it in class. I think it's a little bit unreasonable. You know, I'm not telling you you can't do that, but these kids do carry 15, 18 credit hours. There's only so much they can do. Okay, so you got to figure out what's a reasonable amount. Same with homework. You know, assigning them a 10-page paper every week is probably really excessive. You might think it's really a good idea to do that, but again, they've got 6 classes, 5 classes, you know, there's only so much they can do. The other thing that's challenging is how long to make an exam. I teach a lot of 50-minute classes. I have 50 minutes for them to take an exam. It's really hard to judge how many questions you can have students actually answer in a 50-minute period, especially if you're giving them essay questions. Sometimes it'll take a student 50 minutes to do one essay question. Okay, so you got to think about how you write your questions, how much information you expect in a given question, how much time they're going to have to think about the question. And so that's a challenge, is how long can you make your tests. It's really not fair if half your class isn't finishing their tests by the end of the period. Then you got to think about how many tests and assignments you give. If you only give 2 opportunities for them to earn points in the semester, like let's say all you do is give a midterm and a final, again, it's like, is that fair? You know, stuff happens to people. They have some of these kids have incredibly difficult family lives. If something really bad happened a week before their midterm, and that's 50% of their grade, they're going to fail the class. But if you give them 5, 6, 7 tests, or quizzes and tests, or writing assignments, opportunities to earn points throughout the semester, then you're basically minimizing the effect of bad things happening in their life. You're allowing them to basically make up for maybe slacking off on one assignment. And then I think that's the last thing that comes up. Fair. Drafts are a really good idea, especially for writing assignments. Well, particularly for writing assignments. I used to give a big writing assignment at the end of the semester, and I spent a lot of time talking about how to do it, and I gave them this big course pack on how to write, and all these examples and all this stuff, and then I'd get their final paper and it would be horrible. And I'd be so depressed because 80% of the students are giving me something that's just so below my expectations. And then I figured out I've got to give them time to do drafts. It's a lot of work for you. I used to give writing assignments in my anatomy class and I had to stop because I figured that it wasn't worth me having them do it if I didn't give the opportunity for them to learn from it. Okay? If all they do is turn in something at the end of the class and then they get a grade, they didn't really learn from it. They don't have another opportunity. And because I had 91 students one semester in my class, and I said, that's it, I can't do writing assignments anymore. But if you are going to have writing assignments, you got to have time for them to do a draft. And I even try to give them a class period to do some early efforts. Even if you're just having them write a paragraph in class, you can incorporate some peer review in that. Give them some time when they're your captive audience to practice some of these things. You let the students learn from their mistakes without big penalties. Generally, my first drafts, unless they don't turn one in, they aren't really worth anything. If they don't turn it in, then I take off points from the final. But otherwise, they aren't earning points from the first draft. They aren't losing points from the first draft. So there's no penalty there. They can learn without penalties. I already mentioned peer review. You got to give them good feedback. So I spend more time grading my first drafts than I do on the final. Probably twice as much time. Because I'm trying to give them so much good feedback. And then the feedback needs to be quick. So it's hard. It's a lot of work. And you got to do it pretty quickly. And so you got to kind of think, if I've got a class of 91 students, which has happened to me before, and I don't have time to do any of these things, then maybe this isn't something that you should do at all. I think if you can't do it well, you shouldn't do it at all. Letting them get by writing a really crappy paper isn't really teaching them anything other than I can write a really crappy paper and still pass the class. Generally, I will have a paper due about a month before the end of the semester, and I don't tell them that it's a first draft.
I don't either.
Yep, you don't tell them. If you tell them it's a first draft, you're going to get an outline. And you can't give them feedback on an outline. Or you're going to get something that's like a third of the length that it's really supposed to be. So they think it's their final paper. They think this is my best effort. And then you go through and you give them a little feedback. You hand it back to them. The one or two that are really exceptional papers, you might give them a grade. But there's usually not very many. Usually mine, I get so many citation errors that most of them would be failures under plagiarism anyway. And I'm a stickler for plagiarism, you should know. But, so they don't know. So that's a good tip, is make them think it's their final draft. And then they think you're doing them the biggest favor in the world by letting them rewrite it. It'll really give you kudos, because they're like, oh, thank you for letting me rewrite it. Oh, when really it was your plan all along. All right. So my next topic is to take an interest in the students as people and as scholars. You were in the same place 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? And so 40 years ago, okay. So, I see them as future colleagues. I know that only 1% of them might actually, go on to graduate school or, actually become a colleague, but I like to see them all as future colleagues. And I try to learn everyone's name. This is challenging some semesters because sometimes get a lot of students, and I might not remember their name the next semester. But I do try to learn all of their names, and I make an effort to try to, when I'm calling the roll the first time, I make a little note on the syllabus, like blonde, something. So I'm trying to remember who's who. I get the blonde girls mixed up for like half the semester. I don't know what it is. I can't keep them straight. And I like to try to get to know them, whether it's the first day of class or throughout the semester. I want to know why they're in college, what their career goals are, why they're taking that particular class. And that really does help you when you're lecturing to try to tailor the information to the students, to try to make it relevant for them. I encourage office visits. Sometimes I have students that hang around my office way too much. And so, sometimes it can backfire on you. But for the students that are in trouble, I initiate office visits. The ones that are doing the most poorly, a lot of times are the ones that are least likely to come see you. And so I do, after the first, I give a lot of exams, so it's usually after the second exam. I'll actually have people, I'll write on their exam, you need to come see me. And if they still don't come see me, then I'll go up to them as they're leaving class. And I'll say, can I talk to you for a second? And I will make them come see me, because some of these students are just scared of you. They really are. They're really scared of you as the authority figure. I've rarely had a student assistant in class. I mean, I have had a couple student assistants in class, in my classes, and man, do they open up to those student assistants. So I know there's a big difference. They really are scared of us. As approachable as we try to be, the ones that are usually the most in trouble are the ones that are the most scared of you. And so I try to initiate. And even when they come to see me, I don't just say, okay, how can we make you pass this class? A lot of times I'm talking to them about what their career goals are, how much commitment do they really have. I have, all these pre-nursing students, and the vast majority of them are not committed to the process of becoming a nurse. And it's not that they're not smart enough, it's not that they're not, passionate enough, it's just that they are not committed to putting in the work that it's going to take to be a nurse. And so I have honest conversations with them about, are we sure that this is what you want to do? What are alternatives? What are other ways of accomplishing the goal, basically by taking a different route? What are the things that you're really good at? What are the things you're really interested in? I've been the cause of many major changes. I don't want to run anyone out of college. I never make that an option. Well, sometimes I'll send some of them to Egg and Tech, the pre-nursing people. But I want them to do what makes them happy. The other thing in biology is 80% of them want to be doctors or dentists or pharmacists. Why do you want to be a doctor? If they tell me to make a lot of money, it's like, well, you're not going to be making a lot of money for like 20 years. And you're going to have a lot of debt. So if it's just to make money, are you in it for the long haul? A lot of times it's because that's what my parents expect me to do. Okay? And then you can you don't have to do what your parents expect you to do. I mean, maybe they're paying for college. And maybe you don't have that much freedom, but you could try to talk to them and convince them that what you really want to do is theater or art or communications or history or whatever. Whatever it is, psychology, sociology, something other than being a doctor. Do what you like. I've had a student that wanted to be a nurse that was actually the best writer I have ever seen. She was miserable at biology. I was like, why aren't you doing something? And she told me she had won all of these writing awards in high school. I said, why aren't you doing something with that skill? And she actually ended up going on to be a communications major. So, take the opportunity to help these kids beyond just the classroom. Still not finally, but my final thing on my teaching philosophy, I did not know I would take the full amount of time. This is crazy. But it's to push for excellence. I'm not going to say too much about this, but there's a lot of pressure sometimes for grade inflation. We hear about how retention is like our #1 priority, but we have to hold our standards high. Okay, that piece of paper that says I am a graduate of USC Aiken is meaningless as soon as our standards go down. There's a couple schools in the state that are having problems. I think one of them is about to get their nursing program taken away from them because their standards were not high enough. Okay, so it should never be easy to make an A. In my classes, I tend to make it not too hard to get a C, but really hard to get an A. So it's kind of hard to design your grading so that you get that, but it should never be easy to get an A in a class. And most of the students will rise to the challenge if you're giving them the support that they need. And that goes back to everything else I've been talking about with study guides and helping them develop study skills and being available for questions and being in your office and all of that. If you give them all of these support tools, most of them will rise to the challenge. Of course, you will get on your evaluations at the end of the year the handful of students that say, this is impossible. How can anyone get an A? Well, the 10% of people that did get an A would probably disagree with you. So that's another tip for the new people. We do have them do a writing portfolio their junior year, and there is a rubric that they use to score the papers. And the papers come from any class, so they come from all different disciplines. And if you ask Lynn here,
I'll be happy to share that rubric.
she will give you the
with
rubric, and if you want to use that to score your papers, or if you want to share it with the students.
And I know certain departments are even using it, so chemistry's using it.
So final tidbits of advice. Always be as prepared as possible. You can see I've been preparing so much for my classes that I haven't been quite as prepared for this, which is why I didn't know how long it would take. Try to get your lectures ready as far in advance as you possibly can. This allows you to see the connections between lectures in the future. It makes a huge difference. If you're putting your lectures together the day before you lecture, then when you lecture like 3 weeks later, you go, oh man, I wish I had said something about this back then, but it's too late. That'll come for the new folks as you teach many times. Never stop updating and improving your courses. I update and improve my courses every semester. I've taught anatomy, oh goodness, I don't know, 17 times or something. And every semester there's still something that I'm fixing, changing, reorganizing. Part of that's coming from feedback from the students. Pay attention to the students, and not just what they write on the evaluations, but how they're scoring on different aspects of their tests, the looks on their faces when you're talking about certain things. If they all look like they're totally lost when you're discussing something, you better figure out a different way of discussing it. Because it obviously didn't work. If they're all sitting there going, what? Attend workshops and seminars. You're already here, so I'm preaching to the choir. Most of the faces I see here are people that are always at these things. Okay? And, those of us that are always at these things, I think that we're all pretty good teachers, and it's because we're always coming to these things. The CI Institute at the end of the year, even if you never teach CI, that was so beneficial. I learned so many new techniques and ideas and strategies. So going to the different seminars is a great way to improve your teaching. And then I already said this, talk to your colleagues. Ask them to look at your syllabi. Ask them to look at your assignments. Ask them their advice on doing different things. You asked advice about assigning the paper in your 101 class.
Yeah.
That's great. So no matter how long you've been here, keep talking to your colleagues and asking.
Thank you.